Good evening, Libertarians and friends around the country. My name is Dan Fishman. I am the Executive Director of the Libertarian Party, and it is my pleasure to bring to you tonight our presidential ticket. We'll talk a little bit about how we got there. I first met both of these people in South Carolina, November 2nd of last year, and they both covered a lot of miles to get here. They put in the work, which is something that always happens in a libertarian campaign. It distinguishes us from the old parties where people are anointed. And you saw that happen in the Democrats this cycle, right? Joe Biden was the anointed one. When it looked like there might be some competition, everybody got together to make sure that Joe Biden was going to get the nomination. He was handed it. And Donald Trump, a man who's been handed everything. He talks about being self-made, except for the fact that, of course, his father endowed him with many millions of dollars when he started off. Our two candidates earned this nomination. They campaigned, they worked hard, and now they are the presidential and vice presidential nominee of the Libertarian Party. And to that extent, this show is about them. So let me first introduce our presidential candidate, Joe Jorgensen. Joe, thanks so much for being on LPTV.
Glad to be here, thanks.
And then our vice presidential candidate, Spike Cohen. Spike, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Dan, thank you so much for having us.
Well, I'm really pleased to have you guys. And one of the first things I want to do is introduce you guys to the rest of the country. So, Joe, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to be here, how you came to be the Libertarian presidential candidate?
Well, I'm a longtime libertarian activist. I first heard Honey Lanham on the radio in 1979, and my first reaction was, wow, somebody else believes what I believe. So I never had to be convinced or sold on the ideas of the Libertarian Party. I already thought those, and I was just shocked that somebody else out there agreed with me. So I went to the next county meeting that they had, and the rest is history. I've been a county chair, a state vice chair. I've collected signatures. I've been at fair booths. I've pretty much run the gamut as far as libertarian activism goes.
But you also distinguish yourself in that you've had a very successful professional career. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Currently, I am a senior lecturer at Clemson University. I received my PhD in industrial organizational psychology. I also have an MBA from SMU and a BS from Baylor. My first job out of college after my MBA was to work for IBM. I was a marketing representative for General Systems divisions. I hate to even say this, but this was before the personal computer was even invented, although it wasn't too much longer after I worked for IBM that they invented the personal computer. And then I had a couple of computer companies. I had a software company, and then I duplicated computer software, legally I should add, and went back to school, got my PhD, and here I am now teaching. So it's a varied career.
Oh, that's really fascinating. And so we also have Spike, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I want to dive into your sort of professional background too. But first, how did you come to be here? How did you come to be the vice presidential candidate?
Oh, well, that's quite a journey. So I actually started my political belief as somewhat of a neocon. My parents were more kind of libertarian leaning Republicans, but after 9/11, I bought into the whole neocon lie that we had to spread democracy to keep us safe from the terrorists who hated us for our freedoms and so forth. And over time, seeing the reality of what happened during the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, it really made me re-examine what I believed. And over time, I kind of went from being a neocon to more of a just regular conservative to a constitutionalist to a minarchist, and eventually down to a libertarian. And that's how I got there. I've been what I would consider I guess radical libertarian for several years now. I started 3 years ago. I started Muddy Waters Media, which is or I became the co-owner of Muddy Waters Media, which is geared towards using entertainment to reach the message of liberty outside of libertarian circles. So spreading the message of liberty to people who haven't heard ideas like non-aggression or self-ownership or voluntary solutions, the libertarian message. And it's been pretty successful. And on the weight of that, I decided to put my hat in the ring for the VP run last December. And for 6 months, I hit the trail going to state conventions, listening to the delegates and talking to them, helping raise money for those affiliates. I went to door knocking tours in housing projects and marginalized communities to spread the message there and to also help grow those local affiliates. I did campus tours to help start and grow campus affiliates at various college campuses. I went to Republican and Democrat competing political events to go there and poach some of their supporters and convert a bunch of them over to our side, to great success in New Hampshire, particularly when we did that. And
let me touch on that for a second, because one of the favorite things that I've heard is that if you want to convert people, don't go to church because they're converted already. Can you talk more about the evangelism that you're doing to Republicans and Democrats?
So this was particularly in the Democrat primaries.
Yep.
And the thing was, we went there to be entertaining. And this was back when I was Vermin Supreme's running mate. But we went and, or Vermin Supreme's proposed running mate when we were still in I guess the convention season to pick our nominee. And we went there with an entertaining message. And we engaged the people there, and they were very thrilled to take selfies with us and get autographs from us and everything else. And a lot of them, we got them to sign ballot access petitions for New Hampshire, got them to join the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire if they were in fact New Hampshire residents. Some of them are still on my social media team to this day, former Yang Gang people, former Bernie Sanders people. I'm not convinced that most supporters of different Republican politicians are already converted. That's just all they've heard so far. And if you can present them with something that they find engaging and empathetic and dynamic, they will come over to you. So no, I'm a big fan of poaching Republicans from their own events.
That's awesome. I'm going to follow up on that a little bit more. Joe, I want to come back to you and talk about something that I heard you say in South Carolina that has stayed with me for a long time. The idea that this generation could be called the opt-in generation, because every website that they go to, they have to allow cookies. They have to opt in to have their messaging, to have their information stored. They have to consent to all sorts of things, and they expect that now. Case in point, if anybody has some sort of privacy violation where their information is used for something else, people are really upset about that right now. And you were the first person to bring me to the realization that is truly libertarianism, because libertarianism is consent culture. I wonder if you could elaborate on that idea a little bit.
Sure. So I teach psychology at Clemson, and I read a great book by a social psychologist named Jean Twenge. And the name of the book was called iGen. And by the way, I recommend it to anybody who wants to understand the current young generation. So she pointed out, and the reason she calls them the iGen generation, and we haven't settled on a name yet. People keep saying Gen Z until we come up with a real name, just like we had Gen Y before we called them millennials. But she points out that this is about the most libertarian group coming up through the ranks, that they look at gay marriage and they say, well, of course, why shouldn't you be able to marry who you want? And then they look at guns and say, well, yeah, why shouldn't you own a gun if you want to own a gun? Mm-hmm. So they've been, and she points out that they were raised on computers. So the first generation who has had computers, cell phones the entire time that they've known, since they were pretty much alive. And when you go on a website, you get to opt in. Now, those of us who are older, we never had that. There were mailing lists and people calling on the cell phone or the old landline phone. And so the newer generation, they got used to, nope, don't want that. Nope, don't want that. Don't want that. And they would just go after what they do want. And in fact, even look at their news. I was raised on news from the TV, and you watch it for half an hour. Maybe you don't like this story, but guess what? You have to sit there and listen to it for a couple minutes, because then you got to wait for the next story. But the current iGen generation, they just go to the news website. Nope, I want that one. I want that one. I want that one. It's like their entire lives have been a menu. And the Libertarian Party is great for that, because that is our message, that you only opt into what you want to opt in for. And we use this mostly with Social Security. And I've been saying from the start, if I'm elected president, the first day in office, what I want to do is opt out of Social Security, or have the opt out. So you can immediately opt out of Social Security so that you're no longer paying money into the Ponzi scheme, so that older people can get a secure retirement through another way. And they don't have to be so fearful about being under the whims of Congress. And so this is a message that is just perfect for that generation, because they look around and they're just used to basically ordering from a menu and choosing what they want to choose.
That's awesome. And I appreciate how clearly you put that.
Yep, exactly.
Well,
I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher. I better be able to explain things.
Well,
and I think that will help on the campaign trail.
But I think, too, that that's something that a lot of people don't understand, is that the messaging that people have been getting from the existing government has been, let us tell you how it's supposed to be, as opposed to the libertarian message where we say, let us tell you what your options are. And somebody, you know, Spike, you're a guy who's done that a lot, where you start explaining to people that they actually are more options than what they have.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I get them. The biggest challenge with the youth, because like you and Joe already said, they are naturally young people, and I would say young people, I include myself, even though I'm 37 now, I don't feel young anymore, but I guess my age and younger are kind of naturally anti-authoritarian. Like you said, everything is opt-in. Everything is whether you choose or not. You have so many different choices to choose from. They tend to be very anti-authoritarian in how they approach things. The challenge with younger people is that because this system has completely left most of them behind, especially those that are going through the college system and everything else, they are very prone and very receptive to things like, for example, free college or Medicare for all, these so-called, free programs, because it sounds good to them. It sounds like, well, because the system has left me behind in a way that it didn't leave my parents or grandparents behind, they're going to be taxed basically to give me the things that I should have had. And what's great is that because they already have that natural, decentralized, lots of choices, anti-authoritarian way of looking at things, it's very easy to message to them. So for example, with college students, I would talk to them and say, I'd ask them, what their biggest concerns were. And almost all of them said student loan debt. Am I going to be able to get a job, in my chosen field once I get out so I can pay all this student loan debt? And I would say, what are you majoring in? And they'd tell me, and almost always whatever they were majoring in was specifically for whatever their chosen field of work was. And I'd say, well, let me ask you something. What if instead of having to spend 4 to 8 years in university and run up 5 or 6 figures of student debt, what if instead you could do like a voluntary apprenticeship or internship program with people who are in the type of business that you want to get into, where you would apprentice directly under them or intern directly under them, and you do it for free or a small stipend, but you wouldn't be running up, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and it wouldn't take you 4 to 8 years. It would take you considerably less time and cost you far less. And until you reached a point of mastery within that chosen field of work, where the consensus within that profession was that you had met that level of mastery where you can now do it professionally, either yourself or under someone else. And they all said, that's a great idea, but I can't do that. And I'd say, but why? And they'd say, well, because I have to go to college. And I'd say, but why? And they'd say, because I have to get a degree. And I'd say, but why? And that's when they got it. Because of bad, arbitrary, centrally planned decisions that were made on their behalf by government, that in order to do the type of work they wanted to do, they had to go through a certain amount of schooling to get a certain type of degree, to be able to get a certain type of license. And once you speak to them that way, now all of a sudden they don't want free college. They want the government to stop telling them how to get into their chosen field of study or chosen field of work.
That's a really great thing about it. And one of the things you talked about is how persuasive it can be when people say, oh, we're going to give you free college. Oh, yep. We're going to give you free health care. And of course, libertarians, in fact, the theme of our convention is there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. But that messaging of potential reward, and actually reward in general, the positive reward and the model of behavior modification, is something that I'm familiar with. My background is special education, and obviously here I'm going to call you Dr. Jorgensen. Dr. Jorgensen, you are, I know you like to be called Joe, but in this case, I was wondering if you could talk to us first, because a lot of people don't realize how incredibly powerful positive reward and behavior modification is. And I wonder if you could talk about first that as a psychologist, and then talk about how the government has sort of been rewarding behavior that the government wants to see increase.
You're absolutely right. And I could give a whole lecture on reward. Well, in fact, during the school year, I actually give 3 lectures on Skinnerian behaviorism. And even though, yes, we've come a long ways in psychology since Skinner, and by the way, yes, Skinner's the one who said we don't have a free will. Of course, we have a free will. However, a lot of his discoveries still hold true today. For instance, gambling is the only non-substance addiction that is in the DSM, which is a list of basically all the mental disorders. So gambling is basically where you keep pulling down the slot machine. You know, you put the quarter in or dollar, whatever, pull down the slot machine. You go and you go and you go because your brain is wired to think, oh boy, maybe I'll hit the jackpot this time. Maybe I'll hit the jackpot that time. So we are, you know, our bodies were really made for reward, eating, sex, breathing, everything we do. So when we look at the government, what they have done is they have set up artificial rules. You know, if we look at the rules of human beings, if we want to eat, we go look for food. If we have children, you know, we take care of them, whatever. But we are rewarded for basically living and living our lives, like, you know, the 3 little piggies. If you don't work to build a house, then you're out in the cold, or you're out there in the rain. If you don't work to put away food, whatever. So what the government does is the government comes in and says, well, tell you what, if you don't want to work, we will give you money. And notice I said want, because originally there weren't a lot of the rules that we have now. And one of the saddest interviews I saw, and I believe this was in a Wall Street Journal article, in which a reporter interviewed this high school girl, and she was like maybe 15, and she was not using birth control. And the reporter said, well, what are you going to do if you get pregnant? And she said, oh, no problem. I'll just get AFDC, which was Aid for Families with Dependent Children, which was before we went into TANF. And here's what's sad about that is when AFDC was first brought about, it was meant for widows and orphans. And, you know, back in the 1930s, 1940s, we didn't have as many out of wedlock births. And so if through some unfortunate thing, we've got, the father dies, because back then women couldn't work in the workforce like they can today, the breadwinner is gone, we need some way to support that woman. And it made sense at the time because people weren't looking, people weren't going after it like this 15-year-old was. And that's what's so sad is you put up something that's a safety net that's supposed to catch you if you fall. And now people are planning on jumping into the safety net. And what it does is it robs them of their dignity. It robs them of the pleasure of accomplishment, of maybe finding their way out in the world. And last, it's really robbing families, because what we've seen is through changes in welfare, oftentimes if the father is there, then the mother or the children have to give up at least some of their welfare. So now basically the government is literally saying, just like you've got a rat in a maze. Okay, you go through the maze or you press the bar, you get the cheese, whatever. The government is actually setting up a system which says, okay, if you have a broken family and do not have a father, do not have a role model, we will reward you and give you money. And I'd like to point out that a child's most important, most influential role model is a same-sex parent. So now we've got a lot of young boys out there who don't have that father as a role model. And if I could slip in one other thing too, I can be a professor if I want. What we have now in the other thing that the government did that was not good was before we had planned housing, people with less money would be living next to people with more money, who'd be living next to stores near, it was just kind of scattered. And then the government comes in and says, okay, we're going to put poor people housing here. We're going to round them all up and put them in one place. So now they're all together. They're not living amongst the community where people can help them,
Exactly.
where people can say, hey, down at our plant, I'm a manager. Hey, I got a job you can have. Instead, it's just a whole group of people living amongst themselves who really can't help each other get out.
Yep.
So somebody interrupted me. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just agreeing with you randomly. As you're talking, I keep saying yes, exactly. I apologize.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, so now what we have is we have a community of poor people, because the government put them all in one place where they can't help each other. And guess what's the only way you can drive a Mercedes? The only way you can drive a Mercedes is if you sell drugs. So now what the government has created is an enclosed community without fathers, and the only role model is the drug dealer who's got the great jewelry and the Mercedes. And now we've got a criminal as a role model. It is just tragedy what the government has done to motivation and incentives.
And that's a fascinating topic because, the stratification of our society is something that we're all really concerned about. And yet most people say, oh, I need government to solve stratification, without realizing that it's government that has been causing the stratification. And Spike, I think I can see you're raring to go on this.
Yeah, no, so government, everything that Joe just said is 100% on point when it comes to the welfare state. There's also the aspect of, we're talking about the positive reinforcement. There's also the negative reinforcement. They stick to that carrot, which is things like occupational licensing laws and other regulatory burdens that have removed so many of the...
Technically, that's punishment, not negative reinforcement, but go ahead.
That's fair. Fair enough. Fair enough. But you have the situation where if you do want to actually try to get ahead, they have criminalized poor entrepreneurialism. If it costs thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to get into to do something even like being a handyman or even braiding hair or doing food service or something like that, which shouldn't cost anything. There's no mastery there that you have to prove. You should just be able to provide a service to someone and charge them for it. But if you can't afford all that money up front to do it, not to mention the taxes and the marketing and everything else that would be involved in starting a business, then it's illegal for you to do it. They have criminalized poor entrepreneurialism, and they've incentivized just getting a check. And I saw that time and time again when I was knocking on doors in housing projects. Every single person there had a side hustle. Everyone, whether they were in their teens or in their 80s, all of them were doing something on the side that was, and most of it, there were some people doing things that just what they were doing was illegal, but they were doing businesses that would be legal if they could afford the thousands or tens of thousands of dollars in compliance costs. And so instead they just did it illegally. And, they didn't realize they were engaging in agorism, but they were living on state property and they were being robbed of any opportunity to be able to get ahead in life. And they were living on the scraps of what they had. When the police came through, it was to collect revenue. It had nothing, or to make sure people weren't doing anything, where they didn't have the right licensing. And if they called the police for something that, like a shooting or something that was an actual, safety issue, good luck ever having the police come there. These were people that had already been fully disabused of the idea that government was in any way trying to do anything but harm them. And so when we came there, they were very receptive to our message, and we signed up many of them as a result of it.
That's awesome. And so I want to thank all the people who are watching. This is, of course, LPTV. We broadcast over YouTube and Facebook, and coming soon to Roku and other channels. We're excited to have you here. I have a couple other shows coming up Friday night, Candidates Corner, and a few other shows. So please make sure that you have LPTV bookmarked and that you check back for our content. I want to follow up on some of those things that you talked about, Spike, and go to you, Joe. The government causing all these problems, and we talk about incentive. Do you think that government has an incentive to have a population that is dependent upon government? Are they doing this on purpose? I'm going to go to you with that question, Joe.
Well, it's hard to, I would say definitely, because, again, I'm not a mind reader, but the only way that they can get power is by having people dependent on them, where they get to say, okay, go back to one of my favorite examples is even like Elizabeth Dole, who basically told the states, tell you what, I'll give you your highway money if you raise your drinking age to 21. So we give money to the federal government, and then the federal government decides, okay, I'm going to give it to either these specific individuals for doing whatever, or these specific states for doing whatever. So not only are they controlling us individually by shaping our behavior, but by doing it, but by going to the states as well and rewarding certain states over others.
That's a great example of a lot of sort of the government, and sometimes, I think that they do it with good intentions. Like the Cash for Clunkers program, sort of the idea was, oh, we're going to suddenly create a world where there aren't going to be gas guzzling cars. But of course, what actually happened? Do you guys know the story? Spike?
Oh yeah. Okay. The cafe rules, exactly. What they said was cars have to have a certain mileage, miles per gallon, and so. But they only had the cars, not the trucks. And so all the moms were like, okay, well, instead of getting a station wagon, we'll get an SUV.
Yeah.
And of course, SUVs have much lower mileage than the station wagons do. So, and also you look at, just the fact that in order to get that mileage, they had to make the metal a lot thinner. And so then cars became less safe, people, higher fatality rates, and just on down the line. So it's one example, like I said, of when government, the people they try to help, they end up hurting.
And Spike, you want to follow up on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, this is the reality of what happens with bad central planning. And this is why we're libertarians. This speaks to the core of why we're libertarians, because when I speak to people about libertarianism, I try to keep it as simple as possible. We as libertarians believe that you own yourself, your life, your body, your labor, and the product of your labor, which is your property, and that no one should be able to take those things from you, and that no, you shouldn't be able to take from anyone else. If you own this thing, it is exclusive to you to enjoy and to give and lend out as only you see fit. Now, not only is that a moral thing that we shouldn't aggress against each other, because if I own this thing and you shouldn't be able to take from me, it also doesn't work if you allow people to take from each other. So if I can simply take from either one of you whenever I see fit, I'm not going to be a good steward of what I have, because I can simply take as much as I need whenever I want to. And you both, of course, aren't going to be the best stewards of what you have, because I could take it from you at any moment. And what is the bad central planning of big government but a system whereby a single entity presumes the authority to take from us as it sees fit? And so when any of these situations, cash for clunkers, the welfare state, immigration laws, the war on drugs, the war on sex work, all of these things boil down to an entity who has presumed the authority to take from us our rights, our bodies, our lives, everything else, our property, whenever it sees fit. And in that kind of a situation, you cannot expect to get good outcomes, especially compared to, the spontaneous nature of human action in a free market. You'll never get the same kind of good outcomes from that.
Oh, and can I mention, because you brought up central planning, and you're talking about it from a self-ownership type. I like to look at it from a practical aspect, and basically how we get things done the best. And one of the best things I learned is in grade school, and unfortunately they don't teach this anymore, but I was taught that the reason that America was so great and Soviet Russia couldn't even feed themselves was because of their central planning, that over there they would have steel, and they wouldn't know, okay, how much steel should go to the cars, how much steel should go to the refrigerators, where do we put all that, who do we give the steel to, is basically what they had to decide with their 5-year plans. In the United States, what we have are prices. So where does the steel go? Well, whoever's going to pay the most. So if the refrigerator manufacturers are going to pay the most, they'll get the steel. If the car manufacturers are, and basically it's a way to vote. I love Milton Friedman. I love his ideas of voting with your feet, voting with your dollars, that you get to decide where the resources go, because individuals, you can look at it as an information system. The market, the different people are sending information by what they're willing to spend as to what resources get used and where they should go. Central planners never do as good of a job.
Exactly.
That's a great thing. It's going to lead into a question. I'm going to go to you with this one first, Spike. Talking about the fact that, voting with your dollars, we are, and I don't think a lot of people have realized it yet. Some people have, but we are on the cusp of a massive recession and probably depression in this country based on the shutdown of the government.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like the thing that would get us out of it is the free market. If people were actually allowed to honestly vote with their dollars for the services they want. But all the reopening plans, all these things that are happening are being run by the government. And it seems to me like that's going to be a path for failure. Spike, what do you think about that?
Well, of course, that's what's going to happen. You have government trying to, it's not as bad as the Soviet Union where they were literally deciding, where the steel should go by committee instead of allowing price signals to determine where it is best allocated. But there's still some kind of half step between that where the government is still trying to pick winners and losers. We saw that with this shutdown. Right. And I mean, we could get into a whole thing about how the government even caused that pandemic to spread as widely as it did by not allowing healthcare professionals to test it for the first 6 to 8 weeks that it was here. But we can put that aside for a moment and just talk about these lockdowns and shutdowns and shelter in place orders and so forth. Isn't it an odd coincidence that the places you were still allowed to go during the lockdowns all happen to be the big box companies, the largest companies who had the biggest crony lobbyists making sure that they remained open? Because it's clearly safe during a pandemic for everyone to crowd into a Walmart or a Target or something like that. But it's definitely not safe for you to go to a small furniture store or something where there might be 3 other people in the building with you. And so that's a perfect example. When you have government making economic decisions based on political calculations as opposed to the perceived best interest of the parties involved in that particular transaction or situation, you're never going to get the same outcomes because you're not having a decision made based on best outcome. You're having a decision made based on the political calculation of the person arbitrarily deciding it.
And that leads me to a really interesting conversation I had recently. In physics, there's this idea of a closed system, that there's only so much energy in the system. And if you apply it to our political system, there's only so much power in the system. And if you believe that all power derives from the people, the only way government gets power is if the people have less power.
Exactly.
The only way a corporation can get power is if government takes power from the people and gives it to that corporation. Joe, I wonder if you could talk about sort of the pattern that you see where the government is depowering the people, or the people have been convinced by the government to depower themselves.
Oh, just pick the topic and I'll give you an example.
Right.
Let's go right down the line. We've got the Department of Education, in which parents and teachers and students are no longer the ones who decide what kind of education. But again, people in Washington. Look at even art and music. Why should we spend our money, put our money towards the government and let them decide which artists get money and which artists don't? How about we get to decide that?
Yep.
Keep going, Spike.
Oh, man. I mean, like she said, any topic, immigration. So you have a situation where you have a sizable number of Americans who are demanding that the government infringe upon their right to host, hire, or house whomever they wish on their own property, or to travel to properties where they are welcome, because they have been fed ideas, fear-based ideas that migrants are coming to take their jobs and to victimize them and to, bring crime and all sorts of terrible things. And of course, this is the same rhetoric that, my ancestors saw when they came here, 100 plus years ago. But, so there's nothing new under the sun there. But this is an example where government uses, in this case, fear. And this is true with the war on drugs, the war on sex work, the perpetual wars overseas, where they use messaging of fear through the crony corporate media that is, completely beholden to them, and vice versa, to, put fear signals into us to make us basically willingly give away our rights, to say, you know what, I'm scared of, in this case, these migrants, so please put them in camps and please take away my ability to freely associate with people that I could actually probably have better outcomes with.
And could I pick this up and continue and talk about healthcare?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because healthcare is one of the things that I'm passionate about. First of all, it is literally a life or death situation here, a life or death topic. We can talk about education, and if your kids don't have, an ideal first grade experience, if they're forced to not say a prayer or not say the pledge or whatever, if you disagree with the schooling, it's probably not life or death. However, with healthcare, it is. And unfortunately, a lot of people think we have a free market system when we don't. So we're headed towards single payer. But here's what's scary. The people think we have a free market system now, but there are so many ways in which you were talking about people taking choice away. So for instance, you have to go to somebody who has gone through a certain number of years of college, med school, residency, and so forth, as opposed to why couldn't we have other specialists with less training? It's kind of like they're saying, okay, you have to get the Mercedes-Benz of every doctor. What about the certificate of need, in which you have to prove that there is a reason, you have to prove a need for your hospital, that if you want an MRI machine or whatever, you have to prove that you need it. Instead of saying, okay, we're going to open up this hospital, open up this clinic, and if it goes out of business, oh, well, it goes out of business. Instead, you have to prove that it won't go out of business. And so what happens? They have fewer hospitals and fewer clinics, and fewer of everything go up because of that.
And in the worst of situation, in the best of situations, because as someone who has MS, this is also something very near and dear to me. And in the best of situations, what she just described, certificate of need laws and these ridiculous laws where you actually have to prove that you need these devices or you need a new hospital. In the best of situations, it leads to higher costs and lower amounts of access. And in, for example, a pandemic, it leads to people dying in hospital hallways because there aren't enough beds, there aren't enough respirators, there aren't enough ICU beds, and it's just absurd. It is a poorly centrally planned thing. And no, we do not have a free market. And I've actually walked people through before. We've actually had episodes on my show where we have talked about the history of how the cost of healthcare has continued to skyrocket every single time the government further injects itself into the market. And it's a very sad thing that both Republicans and Democrats in their endless left-right rope-a-dope are constantly pushing our system as free market capitalism, which it is not, and constantly pushing our healthcare system as free market healthcare, which it is not, clearly is not.
Yeah, and can I bring up one other point too?
Yes, please. Yeah, no, please, I will never stop you. I have to keep muting myself so I don't talk over you saying yes over and over again.
No, I think that time I was interrupting you. Getting back to the free market, and by the way, this brings in the reward part too. So see how I'm doing that as a teacher, tying all the loose ends together. So what I would point out is that, first of all, we're getting back to the reward. You never spend other people's money as well as you spend your own. And another saying is you never wash the rental car before you take it back. So the only two fields in which there is a true profit, or more of a free market, let's say, would be cosmetic surgery and LASIK surgery. And in both of those fields, the quality has gone up dramatically and the prices have gone down dramatically. Because they have to actually fight for their customers. They have to compete. And last March, I was in a third-party debate in which there were a couple of socialists in the debate, and one of the socialists was saying, "Oh, we got to get rid of the system where doctors just go after profit." And when it was my turn, I was like, "You better hope you have a system in which doctors go after profit, as they do with cosmetic surgery and LASIK surgery, because then you're the customer, and then they have to compete for you. They don't just put out whatever they want because the insurance is going to pay for it and you don't care. They have to actively work to get you to buy their product."
And that is a fascinating point. And, you both sort of touched on the issue of fear as something that, sort of the government and all the other systems are pushing out. And, being a New England guy, I have some Norman Rockwell prints around the house. And one of the ones that speaks to me a lot is the four freedoms. And one of the things that's in there is he talks about the fact that everybody desires to have a life that is free from fear. And yet we see government selling fear right now. In fact, it's been said that a while ago, the two political parties realized that rather than running a new positive campaign about the each candidate when they have new candidates come out, they could run the same fearful campaign about the other side and make people more afraid. And when you hear people talk about voting for Joe Biden right now, they're not saying vote for Joe Biden because he's a great candidate.
Exactly.
They're saying vote for Joe Biden because if you don't, you have to be afraid of Donald Trump.
And vice versa. They're saying vote for Donald Trump or you're going to get Joe Biden. They are literally, it is a hostage taker. It is two hostage takers who are both in on it, who are, holding each other hostage, each other's side hostage and saying, if you don't vote for me, you're going to get that guy. And this guy says, if you don't vote for me, you're going to get that guy. It's a total scam.
And so then you guys are bringing this refreshing message. So Joe, I wonder if you could talk about why people don't have to be afraid of freedom.
Because freedom allows you to live the life you want. And can I first mention when you said they do that, how the Democrats and Republicans are basically putting a fear message out there? I also had that in one of my debate openings. So with freedom, you have the freedom to make your own choices instead of having people make choices for you. Now, I have to admit, a lot of people might be a little concerned because there are some people who are very indecisive, who really don't want to go out and make a stand. But here's what they don't realize is that there will be other people out there making the stand for them. So for instance, if you don't know which TV to buy or which doctor to choose who's not licensed, you can go to something like a Consumer Reports or some other pro-consumer advocacy, and they can help you guide their choices. The thing is that when it's up to government to guide our choices, government guides our choices with dollars from lobbyists, special interests, and they basically direct everybody to the people who are supporting them, not necessarily the best. Whereas with the free market, we can see, basically it's like, let's bring in the younger generation and the iGen generation with their opt-in. They've been able to, anytime they go to buy anything, they get to see how many stars it has, right? So here's the thing. If you've got, let's say, the government who has a health department and they're going to go out and rate restaurants. Okay, what happens if you don't do a good job, if you're a government employee, and I'm not saying that government employees, hate, go out and try to do poorly at their jobs. I'm not saying that at all. But let's say that you're not a very good rater and you go out to the restaurants and there's rats running around and you still give them a B rating, right? Okay, what's going to happen? Is the government going to go out of business? No. What will they do? They'll just raise taxes and they'll maybe take this guy and put him somewhere else. Now, let's say you're the Mobile Restaurant Guide or one of these other places that gives out ratings. What happens if you tell people, yeah, great restaurant and it sucks, or don't eat here and it's really good? If you keep giving out bad advice, you're going to go out of business, as well you should, because people are going to catch on. And the problem that, the thing is when it's the free market, there is always accountability. And I guess that's my long way of getting to your answer, Dan. I think the biggest reason, I knew I'd find an answer sooner or later. Dan, I think that the biggest reason that people should embrace freedom instead of being afraid of it is because people will be held accountable. Wherever you spend your dollars, whatever you buy, people will be held accountable. If they don't do a good job, then they will go out of business. And let me, one final point here, which this is my favorite one for charity. I've been using it since I ran for U.S. Congress, but I think it's great. Back in the early 90s, the United Way president spent something like $400,000 on artwork. And the donors were outraged. They were saying, that's not where we want our money to go. We want to help poor people. We don't want you spending money on artwork. And by the way, $400,000 then would be like almost $1 million now.
Right.
So what happened was the donors started cutting back. They stopped donating money to the United Way because they didn't want their money to go to artwork. And United Way had to work hard. They had to work to prove their money was going where it should go. And then donations went back up. So what happens when you give money to the federal government and they give money and they don't do a good job getting money to the poor people? What happens if, they start buying fancy artwork? Well, they just raise taxes.
Exactly.
There's nobody that's held accountable.
That's awesome. And so, Spike, I can tell you want to follow up on that. I just want to make sure that can you also touch on the idea of how, to some extent, the government is selling fear as a way to maintain us believing in the fiction of government?
Well, that's how they do it. You have to be afraid to believe that a central monopoly is the best way to get outcomes, especially a violent monopoly that is financed with your own stolen money and is enforced with threats of kidnapping and murder. So obviously you need to have fear involved in that for people to not step back and realize, wait, this is not a good way of getting outcomes. So by the way, several comments back, someone said something about the profit motive being good versus political motive. Political motive is just profit motive, but it's a profit motive that is derived from aggressing upon and harming others. So it is definitely, a good, good faith, non-aggressive profit motive where people have to mutually benefit, where both sides feel as though they've mutually benefited, is far preferable than anything that is going to come from government. So, you're talking about, with fear, they have to use fear, because if people aren't operating in fear, and it's easier to guide people with fear. If someone's scared, you can guide them around more easily. And you can get them into more irrational situations that they never would have done otherwise. And that's why we are constantly being told on the 7 o'clock and 11 o'clock news, we're constantly being told the next thing that's going to kill all of us if we don't do exactly what the government says. And the message is very implicit there, or very explicit, actually. Everything will be fine. Just listen to what we have to say. We're in control. And if you do what we say, then everything will turn out okay. And of course, we innately know that not to be true. We are living in a dystopia right now that is happening as a result of a pandemic that they explicitly stopped healthcare professionals from being able to contain. Government not only doesn't protect you, government actually makes you less protected. Government actually stops you from protecting yourself. We were talking about poverty before. It is illegal in so many cities and counties and states to feed homeless people without paying for a license to do so. And if you go and try to feed them, they will actually come and seize your food and pour bleach in it to make sure no one eats it. Government is not here to protect you or to make you safe or to keep you, fed or to keep you out of poverty. It is to put you in those situations and to make them worse.
That is one of my favorite stories, when Michael Bloomberg declared that restaurants could no longer give their food at the end of the day.
Yep.
Homeless shelters, and they said
same here in Myrtle Beach. Same thing here.
And so this and the argument that Bloomberg gave was that, well, nobody's inspected this food to make sure that it's safe to go to the homeless shelter. So at 11:59, it would have been safe to serve to a customer, but somehow at midnight it was magically spoiled.
So here's the thing: if those homeless people had walked in and paid for the food, it would have been fine.
Yep.
They are criminalizing not having enough money to buy food. That same exact food would be perfectly acceptable for government for you to give out as long as they pay you for it. But the very second you're giving it to them, now it's a problem.
And so that's a fascinating thing too, because of course, if you talk about competition and the free market, when private charities start competing with the government and perhaps show themselves to be more effective than the government, what happens, right? Joe, is that something that really is government doesn't want to see that kind of competition?
Oh, of course. And somebody years ago came up with a great story. They said, imagine you got an inheritance. Let's say you just inherited $100,000. You're well off. You've got a home. You don't really need any of the money. So you say, you know what? I want to give this money to somebody who needs it. So how do I best find somebody who's going to help me get this money from me to the people who truly need it? So $100,000. Do you maybe donate it to your church? Ask them who they're helping out. Do you maybe give it to a private foundation, maybe somebody like United Way, or maybe somebody like Bill and Melinda Gates or Oprah Winfrey? Or do you take that $100,000 and say, here, federal government, I'll give it to you. You can spend it. I mean, people just laugh at that because it's absurd. Of course, you would never willingly take your inheritance and give it to the federal government and say, here, you spend it. I'm sure you'll help the people in need. You would much rather give. Hey, I'm an Apple person. Even I would much rather give my money to Bill Gates than I would to the government.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's a great example too, because, if you think about when people want to do well, when they want to help other people, they don't give money to the government, right? They give money to the actions, to the actors that they see who are making a difference in their areas. And usually it's local people who are having the most impact all the time.
The fact that you see governments that are city and state and regional governments that are effectively banning charity and mutual aid tells you all you need to know about whether or not government is here to help the poor.
I think that's hitting the nail on the head. So we got about 10 minutes left in the show, and I want to start wrapping things up a little bit and talk about the campaign going forward. I think one of the really exciting things, and you guys have seen the comments that have been scrolling past, is that we have a really dynamic team here going on, but you guys are campaigning in the era of COVID, right? It's going to be hard to do a lot of the physical appearances that we've done in the past. It's going to hard to, it's getting on planes. There's not as many flights as there used to be. I wonder if you guys can talk about how you're going to be doing the messaging. I'm going to reverse it a little bit and give you guys about 2 minutes on this because you guys are pros and you can hit all the timing marks now from all the debates you've been doing. Spike, talk about campaigning in the era of COVID.
I actually see this as a great equalizer. So in the past, when the Republicrats would campaign, especially on a national level, what do they do? Joe Biden and Trump, and they go into these large stadiums and they put a bunch of paid AstroTurf people behind them. So there's dozens or hundreds of people behind them giving this sort of air of inevitability. That's what you see. You're looking and you see this politician and you see a bunch of people behind them. And the message is clear. All these people are behind that politician. Why aren't you? And then you see Trump and all the people are behind them. Why aren't you? And then, with third-party people who can't afford to hire, 1,000 people to stand behind us, now, we don't look as inevitable or as popular. Now we're all just people in front of our webcams. All of us are doing the same thing. The only difference now is that they are just people in front of their webcams with terrible ideas who have to try to defend this terrible system that's this terrible thing that has happened as a direct result of their failures and aggressions. Whereas we are people in front of our webcams who can have our great ideas and share our great ideas and put them on the defensive. So I think it's actually in one way, it's actually a very a great equalizer. Obviously, it creates problems with things like ballot access, trying to get petitions signed in a time when it would actually be illegal to try to get that many petitions signed, just because of what it would involve having to do. So we're involved in lawsuits to try to force ballot access and things like that. But in terms of the actual campaigning itself, I find it to be a great equalizer. And of course, that's why it's a good idea that you have an accomplished podcaster as one of your on your actual presidential ticket here, is because we have a history of doing this. My podcast is better than Joe Biden's. The quality is better, and obviously the ideas coming from it are better. We have a history of doing viral videos and things like that.
The delegation always chooses the best possible candidates. Before I go back to Joe, I want to talk about some of the donations that have come in right now, people who are jazzed about this ticket. So I want to thank Michael Martellaro, Paul Sweitz, Grace Swanson. Thank you guys very much for donations that are the thing that make this campaign go. And thank you. Joe, I think Spike hit campaigning in COVID out of the park. I want to give you a couple of things to talk about. There's a saying in politics that money is the mother's milk of politics and data is its daily bread. Can you talk about the need for the campaign for financial support, but also for data support?
Oh, absolutely, because we need to reach as many people as we possibly can. And to do that, to the outreach, it takes money. We need to be able to have advertising. We need to be able to have other shows like this, and we need to get the word out. Unfortunately, the Democrats and Republicans both get a lot of media attention that we don't get. And one of the, and it's kind of like a, what do you call it? Where it's a cycle. Because if we don't get enough money to run ads, then what they say is they say, well, you don't have enough attention, so we're not going to talk about you in our nightly news, in our news show tonight. And we say, well, but we don't have enough money for ads because you're not mentioning us in your news. And they say, okay, well, if you start making money, then we'll mention you. So, basically we have to get that rolling. What we have to do is we have to show that we are newsworthy. We have to be able to buy ads. And one thing that we're going to do that's been a little different from past campaigns is we are going to get advertising out there sooner so that people do hear of us. Because if we can get advertising out there sooner, then first of all, yes, the media will see that, okay, maybe we should pay attention. But secondly, so that other people will hear about us, and then they will donate, and then that will make it even bigger. So we want to grow exponentially.
I think that that's a great goal. And in this era, there's a lot of opportunities that are available to us. So I'm going to put on my executive director hat here for a moment. And I have a charge for everybody watching this. This has been an amazing broadcast, very high quality. The sort of thing that, frankly, a Republican or a Democrat couldn't do. They couldn't have an intellectual but also attainable conversation about the political issues facing this country. This happened because of you. This happened because of our candidates, but more people have to see it. So I want to charge you guys to do two things. First, you need to share this. You need to share this in your social media platform, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook. Maybe you can go on both of them, but you really need to share it. And then the next one, I'm asking for an exercise in literacy. Find your local paper. They need content. You can write a letter to the editor right now, and it will get published. So right now, there are 1,000 people watching this broadcast. Okay, we're probably going to have over 20,000 views by tomorrow morning. If every person who is watching this writes a letter to the editor, I am so excited about the Libertarian campaign. I'm so excited about Joe Jorgensen, so excited about Spike Cohen. If you get that message out there, these candidates are going to be successful. And so we have 3 minutes left in the broadcast. I'm going to split it up unequally. I'm going to give Spike a minute, and I'm going to give Joe 2. But Spike, give us a minute. Talk to the electorate.
I just want to thank everyone for your support, and I want to thank, my computer's telling me things. I want to thank everyone for your support. I want to thank you for supporting this ticket and for voting for this ticket. And Joe Jorgensen and I are going to spend the next 6 months spreading an empathetic, dynamic, and engaging message of maximizing human freedom in our time and eliminating and dismantling these systems that are causing bad, unequitable, and harmful and abusive outcomes, and replacing them with voluntary solutions that will be able to, free the markets and free the people so that we can all live better lives and see the direct benefits of that. And I hope that you join us in doing this. Share this, tell people about our campaign. If you can donate, do that. Be sure to share and everything else, and write letters to the editor and everything. Be as engaging as you can, and spread forth with goodwill and cheer an empathetic message of liberty in our time. Thank you.
That's awesome. Joe, take us home.
Okay, well, first of all, yes, I would like to thank the delegates and thank the Libertarian Party, because it has been less than a week. And so I really appreciate your support, and I will continue to work hard to continue to earn your support. I will pretend like every week I'm in another debate and I'm trying to win you over again. And I'm going to send the message of liberty out there. And Dan, you mentioned earlier about the coronavirus and campaigning. I would like to point out, I do think that my backdrop is a heck of a lot better than Joe Biden's backdrop. Although people have said, well, it looks like a fake fireplace. Actually, this is my dining room / office, and the house is 100 or yeah, it was built in 1912. It's over 100 years old, so real fireplace. But I just want to talk about the message that I'm going to be spreading against Joe Biden, who's locked up in his basement with all those books. I'm going to be talking about what people are excited about. And what people are excited about now, they're worried about healthcare. We have to explain healthcare to them. We have to talk about bringing our troops home. We have to explain to everybody that there's no need for us to be the world's policeman, that being all around the world actually makes us less safe, not more safe. And the irony here is that the military is supposed to keep us more safe, not less safe. And last, I'd like to talk about the environment again, because the iGen generation is really concerned about the environment. So are millennials, for that matter. And once again, as with any topic, the free market works best. It works much better than government bureaucrats planning in Washington. Thank you so much.
That's fantastic. Thank you guys very much for this excellent show. I'm going to come back and talk about one more thing. This pin that I have right here, this is a pin that you get when you are a lifetime member of the Libertarian Party. And we are bringing people in because we understand that the struggle for liberty in our lifetimes is a lifetime struggle. If you want to find out more about that, lp.org/lifetime. This is LPTV, bringing you the issues of the Libertarian Party, bringing you our candidates, and broadcasting out to the world. Please share. Please do everything you can to support this ticket. And thank you guys very much for tuning in.